Hello, everyone. My name is Kenji Maeda. I am the Executive Director of the Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance. I want to acknowledge that GVPTA, we are based on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, something that we think about all the time, especially as we think about how we program, how we govern, and our relevance and the impact that we have on the arts and culture community, and our role in terms of the reconciliation and our building our relationships with Indigenous nations here. But we also recognize that many of you are coming from all across BC on different lands and different nations as well. So today we have our event, our session here in partnership with Pi Theater, and Richard's going to come up in just a second. But I'm going to go over just a few of the logistical pieces, and then I'm going to throw it over to Richard and Jason to get the conversation going. So for those of you who would like to use the captioning service, what you're going to see at the top of your screen is the custom live streaming service is live. We're not actually live streaming, it's actually just connected to our captioning service. So if you want to use that, just click on the live stream service button at the very top. It's going to ask you if you want to open that, and then it'll open up a separate screen where you're going to be able to read the caption at the same time. So it's going to be in your browser. The other thing that you will notice is that we are recording this session, and we will upload this onto YouTube in the next couple days, so that if anybody in your organization wants to review the recording at a later date, or if you want to go back and listen to some of the pieces that Jason's talking about, then you're welcome to do that as well. And if for any questions that you have, please do just use the Q&A window that you can see pop up in your Zoom screen. That's the main place that we want you to ask questions that you wish Jason to answer. This is particularly because we have over 40 people in the room right now. And so the chat window is might get a little bit messy. So any direct questions, put them into the Q&A window. So I'm going to invite Richard and Jason to turn on their video and microphone at this point. There we go. And I'm going to throw it to Richard from here.
Thank you very much, Kenji. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our little session this afternoon. I'm glad there's so much interest in the topic. Just a little bit of background. It occurred to me while I was working on a project called the Transformations Project, centered in Toronto and centered around new media digital, that conversations really weren't happening between producers who traditionally produce theater show, live gatherings in front of live people, and the representatives of the world of digital and new media in terms of representatives of the performers that are professionals and work in that area as well as on stage. So the real intention of this session is for people to get a chance to meet with the representative of, with the representative of UBCP and Jason Cameron, who will who you will meet in a second. And it's a kind of a get to know you session. So Jason's going to give us a little bit of background about the relationship between ACTRA and UBCP. And then he will talk a little bit about an overview about contracting and what jurisdiction they have. And then really open it up to your questions. And I'll relay those to Jason as we go along. Again, the big concern for me was that people that want to pivot to digital and new media don't get caught off guard in terms of their process and in terms of the timeline that they have to develop to make sure that all of their contractual obligations are in place. Sometimes these things take a while. And again, to put a human, we're all in this, oh, I hate to say it, we're all in this together. Really, many of the people on this call probably have experience in performing, maybe producers, whatnot. We're all trying to give the best experience to the viewers, to our audience, to our supporters, and really working together with the associations and unions is the best way to get those things done. So that's the introduction. The handsome face on your screen right now is Jason Cameron, the business agent for film, TV, and new media for UBCP. And that's the British Columbia affiliate, I hope I've got that word right, Jason, of ACTRA. So we'll turn it over to Jason. Thanks again, everybody, for being here.
Great. Thank you, Richard, and thank you to the GVPTA for setting this up. I'm hoping this is going to be informative. It's always tricky being involved in these webinars, and I've been involved in a few, not necessarily for this subject matter, but just as far as a format goes of seeing my face, but not seeing who I'm talking to. So it's a bit disconcerting, but I'll try to move past that. So yeah, as Richard said, I'm with UBCP ACTRA. My official title is Business Agent for Film, Television, and New Media. I've been here at UBCP ACTRA for about 6 years now. Prior to that, I was actually with the Directors Guild of Canada, based here in Vancouver, for about 10 years before that. So just to give you a little bit of background about what UBCP is and what we do, who we represent. As Richard mentioned, we are an autonomous branch of ACTRA. So what that means is that we have separate agreements from the ones that cover the rest of ACTRA's jurisdiction east of the Rockies. So we are unique in that sense. Our agreements, there's a lot of similarities there, but there are some key differences. So I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation to educate some of the producers that may have been involved in a similar webinar hosted by ACTRA Toronto. So as I mentioned, we have 2 separate agreements. They're exclusive to BC. How we've been covering the types of productions that you guys are going to be producing that are going to be recorded and potentially live streamed and made available through digital platforms is really through one of 2 agreements. One is called our BC Master Production Agreement, and the other program is our Ultralow Budget program. And I believe that there were 2 links that were sent to everybody ahead of time. So hopefully you've had a chance to go through it. If not, feel free after this webinar and reach out to me if you have any specific questions. I do also want to say that you know, it's been an interesting several months here at UBCP ACTRA. Prior to this and prior to the pandemic, I mean, our world was pretty much narrowly focused on film and television new media. I was telling Richard before this that, you know, although live performance and theater production kind of ran parallel in a lot of ways to what we do in film and television new media, but what's different now is that those worlds are really kind of colliding, and it's been a really sharp, steep learning curve for me. I certainly know, I hope more about your sector now than I did back in March. But that said, there's still a lot that I don't know. So appreciate your patience. There may be some questions that you ask that I don't know the answer to because it's just never been posed to us before and doesn't really have relevance to the type of work that we normally do here. But I'll do my best to answer the questions that you guys do have. If I'm not able to answer it, I may have to circle back and maybe follow up in some other way to get those questions answered for you. Okay, so with that said, I think the first thing I want to talk about here is jurisdiction. This is something that really comes up a lot whenever that initial phone call is made to our office from theater producers, is where does the jurisdiction lie between UBCP, ACTRA, and Equity? So the quick answer to that is, if your production is strictly a live performance and there's no recording intended, or it's not going to be recorded at all, it's clearly Equity's jurisdiction. If you're producing it with the intent to broadcast or live stream it, and there's no plan to have it in front of a live audience, then that jurisdiction would fall under UBCP ACTRA. Where we get into some trickiness is if it's going to be a combination of both, if it's a hybrid. If it's either a live stage production that is having to pivot, as Richard has said, that we're all kind of experiencing right now, or as we've seen more recently, as some restrictions have been lifted, a hybrid of a live performance with an in-person audience that's also going to be recorded and made available through live streaming or other sort of digital distribution. then we're talking about a shared jurisdiction. So when we have been dealing with types of productions that would fall under the shared jurisdiction, we've been working pretty closely with Equity, both in Toronto and here at the Vancouver office. We have a really good relationship, I feel, with Equity. And I think we both have the same objective, is to make it as simple and easy and painless for all of you as possible. You know, so certainly from our standpoint, to that extent, we try to be flexible. It's ultimately a lot of times about trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. But we do have some flexibility, and we understand that it's challenging times for everybody, and our objective isn't obviously to make things more difficult for you, quite the contrary. So that's just a little bit about the jurisdiction. And there may be more questions about that, and I can certainly answer. So just getting into the two agreements that we have, I'll start first with our BC Master Production Agreement. So this is our main agreement, and obviously it was drafted and negotiated to cover film and television and new media. It didn't necessarily contemplate this type of content creation. And where we would look to apply the BC Master Production Agreement in your world would generally be for higher productions, and or higher budget productions. And what I mean by higher budget would be over $150,000. In the BC Master Production Agreement, we have different appendices that deal with different types of production. So Appendix R would be our new media appendix. And that would be what we would cover, higher budget stage productions that are going to have a digital distribution. So within Appendix R, we have our tiered discounts. And generally the ones that have had a high enough budget to support the BC Master Production Agreement, we've covered under what we call our Tier D, which is our lowest tier with the highest discount. So that provides for a 35% discount off the scale rates. You also want to factor in fringes on top of that. So it's 16.5% of the performer's fees. There would be use fees on top of that. So when we're talking about use fees, it's really about the ongoing use of the content that you're creating, because essentially once that performance is out there, there's a value that we attach to that performance. So there's the initial session fees that I'll be referring to, and then there'd be the ongoing obligations for that ongoing distribution of that content. So under the BCMPA, typically what we see is what's called a prepayment. So that's a percentage of the fees that you're paying up front that pay for ongoing use for a set period of time. We don't have in perpetuity buyouts, unfortunately. So fortunately for our performers, but maybe unfortunately for you. So it's basically under Appendix R, there's a 5-year prepayment period, and it's 105%. Okay. Now, what I should mention is that with the initial session fee, the 5-year clock starts after 90 days. So with your session fee, you get the use of that, you can distribute that content, make as much money as you can for 90 days. And then after that, that 5-year clock would start. Okay, so after the 5 years expires, you have the option to either renew another 5 years at 105%, or you can move over to what we call a residual formula. So, and what's referred to as distributor's gross revenue. And a percentage of that distributor's gross revenue would then be remitted back to the union to be distributed equally among the performers that were involved in that project. So in this case, it would be 8% of any revenue generated after that 5-year period. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about the BC Master Production Agreement, because in the months that I've been talking to a lot of you, it seems that a lot of the productions that you guys are looking at covering under one of our contracts are generally lower budget. And again, that cutoff would be $150,000. So for anything under $150,000, you'd be looking at the Ultralow Budget program. So with the Ultralow Budget program, there's a lot less for you to know about that. It's a self-contained agreement. We have a lot of control and a lot of flexibility over the Ultralow Budget program. So what I've kind of found is that it works best, again, in our goal to try to fit that square peg in the round hole. So with the Ultralow Budget program, it requires a payment of $100 a day for all performers. There are no fringes involved in that. And as far as the ongoing use, the back-end participation, the distributor's gross revenue I was referring to, that percentage would be 5%. So 5% of any money that you're making in revenue from the distribution of that content would be directed back to the performers. And just to be clear, that's not 5% for each performer. That's a total of 5% equally distributed among the performers. So how that would work is once you start generating revenue, you would be reporting that back to us. We have a separate residuals department that handles that. And the other thing that I would want to mention with the ultra low budget program would be insurance. So here in BC, as long as you are paying your employees, your performers, anybody, it would be covered under WorkSafe. Now, there are components of our ultra low budget program that I won't get into too much detail where there are no fees paid to the performers. If you're going to be covered under one of those components of our ultra low budget program, what we have is accident onset insurance. And that accident onset insurance essentially replaces WorkSafe coverage. So if, again, if you don't qualify for WorkSafe by virtue of the fact that you're mostly working with volunteers, essentially you're not paying your performers, then you would contact ACTRA Fraternal Benefit Society, which is in Toronto. I think that all this information is on our website. So if I'm speaking too quickly and you're not keeping up, you can certainly refer to our website. All that information is there. But that's who would be administering that accident onset insurance. So that would need to be in place if you don't have WorkSafe coverage on an ultra low budget program. Additional insurance would come into effect if you have any stunts. So because accident onset insurance wouldn't cover stunts, you would need supplementary commercial general liability insurance. And again, there's more information on our website about that, but there's a list of things that you would need to have in your CGL policy to cover what you would need to as a requirement for the ultra low budget program. So the process for going through the ultra low budget program, your first step would be to go to our website. Again, you guys should have all received the links for that. You'll want to secure the insurance. So again, whether that's through WorkSafe BC or through accident onset, you need to secure that in place and have that in place before you fill out your application form for the program. So once you fill that application in, it's all done online, and that goes to any one of our 3 ultra low budget administrators. At that point, they'll be available to help guide you through the process. So the application is filled out. Then the ULB administrators will send in an agreement for you to sign, which is essentially your contract. It's fairly small. It's only about a 5-page agreement. There are things that you would need to submit to the ULB administrators, including the script, the budget, and your cast list. And once that's submitted, the ULB administrators will provide you with performer forms. So essentially the contracts that you're going to be executing with your performers. And those performer forms would be returned to us after they've been filled out and signed. So I think that is the Coles Notes version of the 2 agreements that we have in the process behind that. So not sure what would be next, but be available to answer any questions from there.
Yeah, we can take questions in the question window. Thanks for that. Just off the top of my head, you said that sometimes performers might want to volunteer for a project. How is that defined in the equity world? Equity actors can get together to create co-ops based on an artistic impulse that they share. And then they enter into some kind of revenue split if there is revenue from the project. Where do these, how do these volunteers identify themselves as volunteers?
Yeah, well, I think the first step would be for a theater producer that would be using essentially volunteers as performers. I think they would need to let us know, and we would work with equity to make sure that is the case. We do obviously want to limit that application of that volunteer component of our ultra low budget program to those more community-based volunteer performer situations, as opposed to maybe a higher budget production that can afford at least $100 a day. Mm-hmm. So again, it would just be talking with equity and making sure that that production is qualifying from an equity standpoint for that ability to do just that, to have performers volunteer and share in any profits.
Yeah, I think a lot of theater people are sort of getting interested in doing little or smaller ultra-low budget pieces that aren't necessarily connected to previous productions or plays per se, but using new technology just because the door is open, and small theaters are almost becoming research and development agents in a certain sort of way for low budget kinds of programming. There was another question that popped up. What's considered a stunt?
Well, I can certainly share what would be considered a stunt in my usual world in film, television, new media. It could be anything from fight scenes to anything involving weapons, stunt driving. Obviously, stunt driving is not really going to have much applicability for stage performances, but certainly fight scenes or anything where there's an element of danger beyond just sort of normal actor action. So I'm not sure how often that happens in the theater world, but you know, that would be the gist of it. I mean, we can certainly, if any producers had any specific questions with this particular script in mind, and they wanted to go over what sequences they would be looking at having, you know, we're certainly available to sort of say, you know, that, you know, from insurance standpoint, at least anyway, that wouldn't necessarily be considered a stunt.
Right. So when in doubt, it's not a bad idea to ask.
It's always a good idea to ask.
Somebody that said, well, this might be a little off topic or a silly question, but of course there's no such thing. The question was, does any of this apply to the capture and streaming of a live music event? So I guess this kind of touches on the area of jurisdiction and who exactly is represented through ACTRA and BCP.
Yeah, for the purposes of this conversation and what we're doing, again, with the recognition that there's some shared jurisdiction between us and equity, it would really just be for, you know, for the type of productions that would normally be equity's jurisdiction, except for the fact that they're now being recorded, right? So as far as live music goes, that's not something that we cover. It would be more live performance. Mm-hmm.
Is the 100, when does the 5% kick in? You said the $100 a day covers the first 90 days.
No, sorry, the first 90 days, sorry, just to clarify, when we're talking about the first 90 days, that's under the BC Master Production Agreement. So that
I'm sorry.
Your higher budget productions.
Right.
And without getting too into the weeds on this, generally under the BC Master Production Agreement, what a producer would be doing at the time that they're initiating contact with us and wanting to start casting their production is identifying what's called their declared use. So in our world, it would be declaring your use as new media or conventional television, be it free TV or cable or theatrical production. And the purpose behind that is that we need to determine what limited use is included in that session fee for that type of production. So for example, with new media, once you pay your session fees, that gets you complete unfettered use of that content on new media platforms for 90 days, right? So whatever your declared use is, you get a certain amount of time or certain limited platforms that you could release it on without it being subject to any ongoing use fees. The use fees will kick in after the expiration of that declared use period. So again, in new media under BC Master Production Agreement, that would be 90 days. So that 5-year clock starts after 90 days. And then after that 5 years plus 90 days, then you might be looking at that 8% of distributors' gross revenue. Now with the ultra low budget program, we don't have that same setup, that same declared use period. Essentially, you're paying $100 a day and you're just paying for that performance. It doesn't include any ongoing use. So that 5% under the ultra-low budget program that is the distributor's gross revenue shared with the performers, it actually is triggered right from the moment that you start generating revenue.
So if it's a 3-day run or something like that?
Yeah, and again, it wouldn't necessarily be depending on the run, of course, unless you were filming, recording, making available digitally all the performances during those runs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, it would really just be limited to the distributor's gross revenue that you're generating from the recorded performances.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit about the obligation to be contracting when one of the performers is a member of either Equity or Actor or UBCP? If there's one member of any of the affiliated organizations, then the contracts must represent them.
Sure, I can certainly talk to that. So if you're producing something that is not using an Equity or UBCP Actor member, good luck. You're under no obligation to sign with us or Equity, as far as I'm aware. And it would be the same thing in our film and television new media world as well. Once a production wants to use one of our members, now that becomes a signatory production, because our members actually are not able to work on non-union, non-signatory productions. So once you've got a union performer in your cast, then now it becomes a union production, and all performers would be covered by the terms and conditions of both the Equity contract and our contract.
Thanks. Whose jurisdiction are the rehearsal days leading up to the recording streaming day?
Good question. Yeah, this is a question we get a lot of as well. So how we worked it out with Equity is that, again, in these situations where there's shared jurisdiction, we've said, okay, for rehearsal dates, because that's not going to be recorded, certainly not for anything beyond just internal purposes, then we're stepping back and recognizing that that is Equity's jurisdiction. So rehearsal days would be covered under whatever Equity contract that you have in place for the performers.
If you're doing new media, if you're doing a dramatic piece, new media and live streaming, just regular, somebody coming to you and asking about contracting, and you want to have a rehearsal strictly under the Actor and UBCP contracts, are they paid for rehearsal time?
Yes. Yeah, and again, it would depend on which agreement you're falling under that determines what you're paying. So for the ultra-low budget program, it's a flat $100 a day payment. So that would be regardless of whether you're just rehearsing your performers or you're actually filming them. Under a BC Master Production Agreement, we do have language that allows for 2-hour rehearsals. So you can prorate what would otherwise be an 8-hour contracted day. But again, that would only exist in the BC Master Production Agreement. For ultra-low budget program, it would still be the $100 a day for rehearsal days.
Is there any obligation to a company that you know, let's say a company that's a pact signatory, but hosting and helping emerging artists who are not members of either of the associations? Is there an issue around, I guess the issue is who is responsible for the contracting, the presenter or the producer? Does the presenter have any obligation?
The presenter, no, I mean, it can kind of sometimes get a little bit tricky, and we talk with my colleague Alistair in our Toronto office, and I think they kind of encounter the same thing oftentimes. If there's maybe some blurred lines between whether the producer of record is the festival that you're submitting something to, or the venue, if they want to post something on their own website, then it certainly blurs the lines. But the short answer, basically, and the question that I would ask to try to at least get that answer would be who actually owns that production. So who holds the rights to it, who has the ability to go and potentially broker a licensing deal with somebody like CBC Gem, for example. So it really kind of hinge on the answer to that question. But in a general sense, it's the producer that would be responsible for the paperwork with us and who we would be contracting with.
I'm going to read this one straight out. Do I understand correctly that New Media covers live streaming and the Ultralow Budget covers filming and having a final product for future distribution, unlike live streaming that ends as soon as the performance ends?
Yeah, if I understand the question or the comment correctly, I think there's a little bit of a misconception that that there's a distinction, at least from our standpoint, between live streaming and recording for download or ongoing distribution. We don't necessarily make that distinction as it pertains to jurisdiction. So a camera is a camera, whether it's going to be live streamed and just narrowly available for that one day of that performance, or whether there's ongoing opportunities to view that content. We still consider it a recorded performance and would be our jurisdiction, and we would be covering it as such under one of our contracts.
Can you explain the distributor's gross revenue a little more? Do you need to provide actual expenses and revenue to UBCP after the production is wrapped, or is it ongoing? Or this individual was also confused about the difference between gross and net in that context.
Okay. Yeah, so distributor's gross revenue would be any money that you're getting from people accessing a site to look at a live stream of it. It could be any distribution deal or licensing deal that you're making with another party to exhibit that project. It's really just going to be about any revenue that you're generating, by releasing that digital content.
If the digital content is actually not generating any revenue, what are the implications there? If it's not intended to, if it's open to the public?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think, if there's not any intention to generate any revenue, if it's just going to be made available for free on YouTube, for example, then there wouldn't really be any ongoing obligations. Obviously 8% of zero is still going to be zero. So, right. So, that's the approach we would take with that. I'm not speaking on behalf of Actra's jurisdiction east of the Rockies, because I understand that Alistair maybe has a different answer to that, but they also have different agreements as well. And I think they have what's called fair market value that would be considered for these types of projects. But I think even for something that doesn't generate revenue in Actra's world, I think they would still say that they wouldn't necessarily be pursuing any distributor's gross revenue remittances for that.
There's a little blurry thing. We sometimes do play readings, which are sort of performances and sort of workshops. So the question is, in our world, there are sometimes Zoom play readings, gathering actors and playwrights and directors and producers around the table. The question is, when is this considered a broadcast?
It would depend on what you're going to be doing with that reading. So again, it's if you're going to be making it available broadly beyond just the people involved in the production, then we would view that the same way that we would a full-scale production that's being released. Again, it's really about recording performances, whether it's a table read or a full stage production that's distributed out there. We would take the same position that it would be. Once
we've captured somebody's image and are putting it somewhere, then it becomes.
And of course the distinction there would be, and the exception would be if it's just being recorded for internal evaluation purposes. You know, a lot of archive stuff that's never really sees the light of day. No, that wouldn't necessarily need to be covered by our contract. But as soon as you're putting it out there to the world, then yes, it would be, regardless of whether it's a reading session or otherwise.
This, you might not know it, but if people are invited into the room to sit sort of in the periphery of the tables to listen, but no tickets are sold, does that make, is that under UBCP's jurisdiction, or would that be an equity question of whether or not they constitute an audience?
Whether that constitutes an audience, I mean, that's more of a relevant question for equity, I would think. But again, where we're making the distinction again would be, is it being recorded, and B, what's going to be done with that recording? So for us, it doesn't necessarily matter that much whether there's people in attendance. You know, I think the only area that comes into play with us would be that shared jurisdiction that I referenced earlier, where, you know, we have a mix of live in-person audience that it's being produced for, while also simultaneously being recorded and made available for people to view digitally. In terms of declaring revenue to UBCP, are there standard forms that can be downloaded from the website? They're not from the website, but our residuals department does have a reporting forms, and they send that out. But the onus would be on the producers to report to our residuals department when they have started generating revenue, and that would trigger that process with our residuals department.
Great. If people are engaging under the Ultralow Budget program, is there any provision there for engaging stage managers and assistant stage managers and such?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it's our agreements don't cover stage managers and directors. It's strictly just performers. And by performers, we mean obviously actors, principal, dancers, singers, choreographers, stunt performers, stunt coordinators, puppeteers, interestingly enough.
Live musicians as well?
We don't cover live musicians, no. No, that's, it gets a little bit murky because without getting into too much detail, with live musicians, it really would depend on the context and what they're doing to determine whether it would be under our jurisdiction or under the Musicians Association. Yeah,
right.
So.
And I guess in the theater world, the stage manager has some equivalency to an assistant AD. Right. If one had an assistant director, or let's say somebody is directing one of these things, should the producers be speaking to the Directors Guild?
Well, I mean, if this is an equity production, then presumably they would be covering that. And my understanding of how it works with equity is that if there's a stage production that is being recorded, that the payment that is being topped up for the performers that are being recorded, those same provisions would apply to the stage manager and director. And that's more under equity's contract or their requirements rather than ours. But my understanding of it is that despite the fact that they would still qualify for the same payments that the performers would be, it's still nonetheless equity's jurisdiction.
Thank you. For digital streaming, is there a geocached region for UBCP, or can it be a worldwide stream?
Worldwide. Yeah, it's worldwide. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit? So now people are really excited about getting to work on their projects. Can you speak a little bit about actually getting the contracts going? What does the timeline look like?
Yeah, and again, the timeline really depends again on what agreement you would be falling under. For the ultra-low budget program, in the past we've said generally and again, this is in the context of film and television production, and for the most part, the same would apply to live stage production that's being recorded. Generally, we'd like to start hearing from you at least a week ahead of time. And I would recommend even more if it's your first time working under the Ultralow Budget program. Although we try to make it as clean and easy and pain-free as possible. And we also recognize that this is going to be a lot of people's first introduction into our contract. So we recognize that there's probably going to be a lot of back and forth questions. So I always recommend contacting us as early in the process as possible to avoid any last minute surprises. But it also gives our ULB administrators enough time to make sure that they've got everything they need from you with regards to the requirements of the program. And now that timeline has actually been expanded because, of course, we find ourselves in the middle of a pandemic. So what that means in a practical sense for those sort of timelines is that we are requiring a COVID safety plan. So probably a little less so with maybe the work that you guys are doing, but definitely more so with film and television motion picture production, is that we're requiring a COVID safety plan in place, and we need enough time to go through it and make sure that that they've addressed the things that they need to address to ensure the health and safety of performers. So given our production levels are actually going up quite a bit, and paradoxically, considering what's going on in the world, from a film production standpoint, we've never been busier. And I think that's probably a testament to what the infection rate is in BC, but film and television is really kind of exploding right now because there's a lot of production that's normally shooting in American jurisdictions that are coming here as sort of a bit of a safe haven. So all that to say is that may increase the amount of time that it's going to take for myself or the ULB administrators to get back to you. So again, like I said, just as much lead time as possible, but at the very least a week.
Okay, and this question's been asked a couple of times. I think it's been answered, but just to be clear, under the Ultralow Budget, we cannot have an equity contract for rehearsal and an actor UBCP contract for the recording days. Well, you can, right? That is what you said. You should have. You should have.
That's right, and that's a lot of the work that I do with Jennifer here in the Vancouver office of Equity, or Ruth in Toronto, is when we have those situations where we have non-recorded rehearsals, live in-person performances that are also being recorded, where there's a real intersection of those jurisdictions, is just to work together to make sure that at the end of the day, you're not paying twice for the same thing under two different contracts. So really kind of trying to establish, okay, at what point do we get to the end of Equity's jurisdiction, and where does our jurisdiction kick in, and sort of assigning the contracting based on that, so we don't really have overlap that's going to be, an added cost to theater producers.
Here's an interesting thank you. Here's an interesting kind of question. What about trailers used to promote the production?
We cover trailers as well, yeah. Yeah, so again, that would fall into the same thing as your workshop or script readings or table reads, anything, again, that is going to be recorded and distributed out into the world would be covered under a contract. And for something like a trailer, yeah, that's pretty easy to cover under our Ultralow Budget program.
YouTube is making a lot of money for some individuals. On YouTube, a production could gain revenue through ads. Would that be considered part of gross revenue, even though the material itself is available for free?
It would, yes, because even though it's available for free, it still amounts to revenue that is coming back to the producer. So yes, that would be considered part of distributor's gross revenue.
Okay. A question again. I assume the jurisdiction covers all digital capture, so both visual as well as vocal. We haven't really talked about podcasting and audio or anything like that, but
yeah, for podcasting, that would be a different agreement altogether. And I realized that at the beginning of my introduction, I didn't go over the additional agreements that we have in place that may not be applicable, but certainly, podcasts might be. We have nationally what's called our audio code. So recently we've been covering podcasts under our audio code agreement. It's separate from our BC master production agreement. It's interesting because it didn't at the time that it was drafted, and this is a fairly old agreement that hasn't really been updated, if I'm being frank. But at the time, it didn't really contemplate podcasts, but that's nonetheless how we've been capturing just strictly audio-only productions.
And it really doesn't matter if it's a play or an interview or a news story, does it?
The only thing that it would matter is what section of the audio code it would fall under. So a scripted narrative play would be covered under section F. So that covers all dramatic productions. But yeah, there's different types of audio productions that are contemplated by the different sections of the audio code agreement. So if you actually go onto our website and click on agreements, where you'll see our BC master production agreement. We have one for animation. Our audio code agreement is there as well. So if that's the type of content that you're looking at producing, I would recommend taking a look at that audio code agreement and then reaching out to us if you have any questions.
I think you're somebody who actually read some of the contract. The question is, can you clarify the ultra-low reimbursement requirements?
Ultra-low reimbursement requirement.
That's the question. Maybe the person who asked it could clarify, and we can get back to it.
Okay.
If that doesn't make sense. Some people are curious about other fees that are collected, like SOCAN fees and whatnot. You don't have any participation in that sort of thing, do you?
No, we don't, unfortunately. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to direct you on that, but no, we don't collect SOCAN fees either here or nationally. I think that could probably fall into the category, one of the questions that we can find out after this webcast and maybe circle back to you. So, and maybe just a question to Richard or Kenji, if there are questions, I can certainly jot them down, that we can't answer, if there's going to be a platform for us to be able to send the answers to those questions either to you or to Kenji, and you can maybe distribute those out to everybody that was on this call. But
Kenji, I'm sure that would be possible, wouldn't it? We can take some questions and answers and post them as sort of a Q&A sheet on the website.
Yeah, we'll collect any unanswered questions, because I can see that there are a lot of questions we won't get to, and then pass them over to you, Jason, and you can give us some. Yeah, great.
Happy to.
Maybe just a couple more. I really appreciate your time today with all of the booming business that's happening in BC. What's the main difference between the ultra-low budget and the 40 under indie program?
So the 40 under indie program is the one I was referencing earlier, which doesn't require payment. So it allows the performer's payment to be waived. That said, there's a higher back-end participation percentage. So instead of 5%, it's actually 20%. Yeah, but so there's a few different components to our ultra low budget program. For those of you who clicked on the link and went through and saw that there's our student ultra low budget program, which would just be for student projects being done through an accredited film school. There would be the 40 under, so that would be anything under $40,000 budget. But again, like I said, although there is no upfront payment, the back end participation would be higher. And mostly what we've been covering most of these pivoted theatrical productions under is our standard ultra low budget program. So that's the $100 a day, but with the lower back end participation of 5%.
In the $100 a day, are there limits in terms of the number? I believe you said 8-hour days. The 8-hour day constitutes a day.
Yeah, that's pretty typical through all of our agreements, is that that minimum call, that the rates are based on an 8-hour day.
I'd say
and then in our main agreement, in our BC master production agreement, there's obviously overtime rates that would kick in after 8 hours. But that's
okay. Yes. Let's say somebody was being really imaginative, and God knows that we try. and maybe doing a live stream of a very short piece, maybe a 5-minute piece, but they wanted to repeat it every maybe 3 times an hour for 5 hours and stream it out live, but it's all happening in one day. Is there any kind of rule around that sort of thing?
Under ultra-low budget, again, it's the $100 a day is for that day of work. So if you're producing multiple productions within that, or multiple installments, I guess, if I understand the scenario or the hypothetical correctly, it wouldn't necessarily trigger $100 for each segment that you're producing. It's based on the work done in the day.
Right. So there seems to be a certain amount of autonomy in all of this, between, a certain amount of goodwill or good faith between the producer and the performer.
And I think that's by design. Again, we try not to encumber producers operating under ultra low budget with too many restrictions or too many onerous things to follow. It's the intent of the ultra low budget program was really a recognition a number of years back of the need for our own members that wanted to create content. So initially it was really just performers wanting to hone their filmmaking skills, either with something fairly elaborate and scripted or just something off the cuff spontaneously that they shoot in the backyard one Saturday afternoon. So it really kind of meant for producers, initially, again, our members, but more recently and more broadly, just to, fairly new producers, a gateway into working with our union.
Mm-hmm. And this is thank you. This is a reiterated question again, but again, people are probably a little bit just trying to find their way through. So the question is, do we need to contract associated artists who are not on camera, like the choreographer or like the set designer and that sort of thing? But again, from what I understand, that's not the jurisdiction of your union. We
do cover choreographers.
Yeah.
So yes. So that would be, yes. And that would be the same whether it's under our ultra low budget program, or if you've got a higher budget to support it, the BC Master Production Agreement.
Whether or not they're on camera.
Correct. Yes. And it would be the same thing with stunt coordinators. We represent stunt coordinators, but they obviously wouldn't be on camera unless they're performing a stunt as well.
And a lot of this information is available on your website.
It is, yes. So to get a list of the positions that we do cover, that would actually be in the beginning of the BC Master Production Agreement. In our definitions, we have a list of the performers that we cover. We're also looking to, and crossing my fingers that sometime over the next few weeks, I'll actually have a moment to put this together, is a little bit of a 1-pager or 2-pager that could really act as a good resource for, the folks in your sector to get a better sense of what the contracting requirements are. And I think who we cover would be probably listed in that document as well.
I imagine that would be.
We're working on, because again, we're always looking at ways to sort of make this easier for you guys. So appreciate any feedback that you guys have to us in terms of how we can make it easier for you, either from a contracting standpoint, or even just kind of understanding what your obligations would be if you're choosing to record your productions.
Terrific. So this, again, was an opportunity for everybody who wasn't familiar with what you do and what the organization does to dip their toes in the water, if you will. But the big takeaway, at least for me, is that your door is open, your phone lines are open, the website's open, and if people have any questions or concerns, if they're starting a project, they should get in touch. Yeah?
Absolutely, yes. And I think, a lot of our members are actually equity members as well. So, I mean, it's not really just about, recognizing that there's this sector that has for the longest time run parallel to us, that we're now helping along in their efforts to pivot. It's also recognizing, again, that a lot of our members, either in the past or currently came up through the theater world as well. So, we see this real simpatico relationship that we have and really want to foster that as well. So, I hope the takeaway from everybody involved in this is that, we're not a big, intimidating, scary union that you want to avoid. We're happy to work with you and make your project work.
That's terrific. Again, we didn't get to all of the questions, but thank you very much, everybody who asked them, and we will try to do the follow-up and post it on the GVPTA and PI websites. But at this point, as we're coming up to the top of the hour, I will turn it back to Kenji for last words. It was great speaking with you, Jason. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Thank you again, Richard and Jason. And again, for everybody, we will post the recording of the video. It will be available both on the PI and the GVPTA website as well. And if you do have questions, we'll also, if Jason, if it's okay, can we include your email address? You might get inundated with, okay. So we'll send Jason a bunch of the questions that were asked that we weren't able to answer here, but we'll also give you Jason's email address so you can get in contact with him directly if you have some of these burning questions as well. So again, thank you everybody. We hope you have a really great afternoon, rest of your afternoon and the rest of your week. Thanks all.